It's like, oh, you look this certain way sometimes. And it's like, because we look a certain way, we have to do all of these big things to prove that we are as smart, that we are as competent, and that we are as high performers as everybody else.
Welcome to LatinX Can, a podcast showcasing Latinx professionals who turn their dreams into realities. I'm your host, La Doctora Jenire Flores Delgado, and today I'm here with Dr. Marisol Capellan, an Afrolatina who is passionate about empowering women and minorities to overcome barriers in their career paths. And she is here to tell you, sí se puede, my friends, sí se puede. Dr. Marisol Capellan, welcome to LatinX Can.
Thank you so much for having me here. This is so exciting. I'm so glad to be here with you and to talk about women in the workplace.
Yes, and I told you earlier, I listened to one of your other podcast episodes, in Pavel's episode, Quien Tú Eres podcast. And when I first listened to it, I was like, wow, like, she's describing my experience in corporate America. I'm going to have to talk to her. And then you reached out, and then I was like, wait, this is the same person. I can't believe it. This is amazing. So I think this is going to be a really great conversation.
This is serendipity, for sure.
Yes, yes. So let's start by talking about your story and where your story begins.
So I am from the Dominican Republic. I came to the U.S. when I was 16. And it was very hard because I was, an immigrant. I'm the first person from my family to come to the U.S. My mother was here, but I wasn't raised with her. I was raised with my grandmother. So when I came here, I was the first one from my grandmother's family to come here. And I had no support system. And I had to work in McDonald's, make sandwiches, and do a lot of these jobs in order for us to, not end up. I was homeless at one point. And I lived in very unsafe conditions. But still, I went to school, graduated with honors. Then I did my master's degree. And then I became the first person in my family to get a doctoral degree. So I'm very excited that I pushed through and that we're talking here today.
Yeah. And Marisol, I see a lot of parallels in our story. I had a lot more privilege than you did, for sure, because when I came here, I also came to study. I was almost 20 at the time, so a little older than you. And I had an incredible support system at the university because I was an international student. I remember in college, when I decided to move off campus, I didn't have a car. So I tried to go grocery shopping with my bike, and I'm terrible at riding a bike, so I would fall all the time with the bags. And so even though I had a support system, it was hard. I can't imagine how hard it was for you.
Imagine going grocery shopping and it starts raining.
Yep.
These are the little things that people don't understand. Or when you're relying on a public transportation and then the bus doesn't show up and you have a test.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's a lottery game with life because you just don't know if you're going to make it each day and whether you're going to be home each day because you're walking on the streets. You don't know who's approaching you. You don't know the dangers that you may be around. Like, it's so many things that can happen. Like, your chances of going through some unsafe situations are very high.
Yeah. Yeah. And you just mentioned that you were homeless at some point when you came to the States. And I want you to tell us a little bit of the story of first how you became homeless, but also how you managed to get out of that situation, right? And then come back and get back on track. Because I think that's a very important story that it's just for immigrants. You do whatever it is to meet your goal.
So, very interesting question. I barely talk about the story behind it because I don't like to speak bad about my mom. But she was kind of the catalyst for all of that. So I usually just say like, oh, I was living in unsafe situations and that's it. But if you go to like the nitty-gritty of things, you're just going to be asking yourself like, wow, your mom did that. So
Yeah.
I still love my parents and all of that. But sometimes when you grow up in dysfunctional situations, and
Mm-hmm.
we know that in the Latino community, people tell us that we have to respect your parents
Mm-hmm.
no matter what happens. But I'm like, what happens if your parents are not very
Right.
supportive and they
Right.
actually put you in situations that are very unsafe? So you
Mm-hmm.
battle a lot with familismo in our community. So what happened with me specifically was that my mom brought me to the US. And after 4 months of living here in the US, she kicked me out. She was like,
Mm-hmm.
you know what? You're out of the house. And then when she kicked me out of the house, I had no place to go. And I went back to the Dominican Republic.
Mm-hmm.
When I went back to the Dominican Republic and I had a green card, again, another immigrant struggle.
Mm-hmm.
If
Mm-hmm.
you stay out of the country for more than 3 months, I believe it was at that point, you lose your residency
Mm-hmm.
status, your green card
Mm-hmm.
status. And I was asking my mom at that point, like, I know that she could just get me an American passport because she was an American citizen, but she wouldn't do it for me. So
Mm-hmm.
my only choice in order for me to come back and get an American passport was to place to stay. And I didn't have a
Mm-hmm.
place to stay.
Mm-hmm.
And I met this woman on a bus one day and I had her
Mm-hmm.
phone number
Yeah.
and I called her. I didn't know who she was. And I was like, can I
Yep.
just stay at your place for like a few months until I find like
Mm-hmm.
where to go and what to do? And, she hadn't responded to me. But at that point, when I was in the Dominican Republic, my manager from McDonald's had a manager at McDonald's
Mm-hmm.
who found my phone number in the Dominican Republic, called my house in the DR.
Wow.
My grandmother picks up the phone and says to me, oh, a guy is like calling you from Miami. And I pick up the phone and he's my manager and he's telling me, I'm so sorry about what happened to you. I know that your mom kicked you out and that you had to leave the country. But if you ever
Mm-hmm.
come back, your job is here and you can always show up. You were a great worker and we would love to have you
Oh.
here. It doesn't matter if it
Mm.
takes you a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months for you to get back. You have a job the minute you get here.
Mm.
And, at that point, I'm 17 now. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking to myself, how am I going to come back to the United States? I already have a job. I just need a place to stay. So this
Right.
lady, accepted me into her house for a few months because, I'm living in her house. I'm sleeping in her bed and
Yeah.
my clothes are all in trash bags.
Yeah.
I don't know what the future holds, but that started my whole journey of I had to leave her house, then I went to another house, then I went to another house, then I had to
Yeah.
sleep in sofas and
Yeah.
it was 4 years of that. It's just one thing after
Mm.
the other. At one point I paid for a room inside a house and then the lady disappeared with my money and I didn't have a place to stay.
Oh.
So many things that you just go
Yeah.
through. And
Yeah.
then so many things that I think, God was by my side all the time that I just
Mm-hmm.
didn't decide to give up and be like, I'm done. I
Mm.
can't do this anymore. This is too much. My mindset had a lot to do with my perseverance.
Right. Yeah. And the reason why I asked you a little bit more is because I wanted to get to the story of the lady you met in the bus, right? Because even though there are bad people out there for sure, but there are also people out there that you meet out of nowhere and people decide to help you and they support you, right? Like I had a similar experience when I moved to Eswatini, a country in Southern Africa, when I was 18. I went to study there, won a scholarship, and it was a boarding school. But I was a diver when I was in Venezuela, like from the trampolines and the swimming pool. And I wanted to continue diving. But in my school, they didn't have any diving. And in Swaziland, it was a very poor country. There was nothing like that. So I decided that I had a full month of vacation. I got there in January, and then the first month of vacation started in April, all the way from April to May. It was a full month, and I couldn't go back to Venezuela. So I said, I'm gonna make it. My goal is to find a place where I can go and dive for the entire month. That way, I'm not losing out too much on my training. And I knew nobody. And the only place where I could probably go and dive was in a nearby city in South Africa that's called Durban. And that was 10 hours away from the school, right? So I needed to find a place to stay. I needed to find a way to get there. I needed to find a coach. So many things, right? And I started by talking to the swimming instructor at the school and asked him if he knew anybody who had ever been related to diving in his life. And he said, yeah, I think I know somebody. And I just went to him and I just kept bugging him and bugging him and bugging him every week. And he's like, oh yeah, I finally found a contact. So he gave me the contact of somebody. And I
You didn't
called.
know that person.
I didn't know that person. And I called, and it turned out that the person that I talked to was the mother of this young girl, young woman. She was in her 20s, who was getting into being a diving coach. And I said, hey, I want to come to Durban. I want to train. I'll find the backpackers to stay near the pool. If you can just recommend an area where I can just stay there. And I'll just go to the pool every day for a month. And she's like, okay, yeah, well, we'll set it up and we'll sort it out. But you're not staying in a backpackers. You're staying in my house.
Wow.
She didn't know me. I didn't know her. She had her entire family in her house. And she's like, no, this city is not a safe city for a young woman to be by herself. So you'll come here and we'll take you to the swimming pool every day. And I was like, wow. And it was the best experience.
But did you see how you when you push towards a goal, you just become so resourceful? And people sometimes, I think nowadays, they give up too easily. Because imagine you having that power within you for everything that you decide in your life right now.
Yeah.
You will just find a way to make it happen. And this is something that we have as immigrants that have been through so much that we've had to call people, stay at people's houses, do a bunch of stuff. Is that we just find a way to make it happen. And sometimes, when you are a woman, a minority woman sometimes, and you have that fire inside of you of making things happen, people are intimidated by that. And people don't understand that in order for us to get to where we are today, we had to be like that. And actually, that's a good thing. It was a bad thing that we had to go through a lot of that. But we learn how to be resilient and persevere and go after our goals. And sometimes when we are in white predominant spaces or spaces where not a lot of people look like us, sometimes people are, they look at us and they don't know what to make of us. And I will say, well, you don't have to make anything of us because we're not there making anything of you. So why don't you just accept us how we are? And, this is a good thing for organizations that you have people that are very resourceful, that are going to find a yes in a no, that are going to try the best they can. And, that's something that comes sometimes from life experiences.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It sucks to have to develop the skill, but it's a great skill to have. It's like when I tell my husband also, we're so used to living in privilege here in the US, right? But I didn't grow up in poverty, but I also didn't grow up in a life of luxury. And so in Venezuela, for example, I remember the first time we went to Puerto Rico, my husband is from Puerto Rico. He's like, Jenny, let me set the stage for you. Sometimes we have hurricanes and sometimes we don't have water. And so we have to collect water and you can take a shower with a little cup of water every day. The hurricane. And I was like, I don't understand what you're talking about. We had to do that every year and there's no hurricanes in Venezuela. It just happened. For 3 months of the year, there was water scarcity and you had to collect water and you just made it work, and you just take a shower however you need to take a shower. Go into your brain, activate survival mode, and you're like, okay, I got it. I'm there. It sucks to have that ability, but it's good to have it at the same time.
You know what you reminded me of? And that's one of the chapters in my book talks about how I grew up in the DR, right in Santiago. And we used to live in a house that wasn't leveled. And I don't know, probably in Venezuela, you have houses like that are on a hill. And because of that, whenever it rained, it will fill up the house with water. Now, after it rained, we had to get buckets and clear the water out of the
Yeah.
house
Yeah.
for hours and just pray that it wasn't going to rain again. Because if it
Yeah.
rain, you have sink, it's not concrete. That's another thing that people take
Yeah.
for granted.
Yeah.
We
The
had
zinc.
a sink house
A roof.
and the sink roof, and the roof had holes, and the holes,
Yeah.
the water comes in. And then if you
Yeah.
had any electricity whatsoever inside your house, you are in fear that the amount of water and the electricity that you're going to get electrocuted. So imagine my awareness having to thrive through all of that.
Yeah.
I mean, I can sometimes, you walk into spaces and you see people complaining and you're just like,
Yeah.
seriously?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, Marisol, one of the things that I want to ask you is that, you came here, at least you had your green card that allowed you to work, right? And so it was about just working to try and, make
Well, I wouldn't get a full-time job because I was underage.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
I know what you're.
Yeah, no, but I think that's, we always talk about, even though we face challenges and discrimination, there's always some kind of privilege that we enjoy, right? Like that we have in life. We all have some kind of privilege that we have in our lives. But the one thing I wanted to ask you, so imagine that you turn 18 and now you could have got a full-time job. I see this a lot in Latinx communities in the States, in which they start getting a full-time job, they start earning maybe some amount of money that seems to be okay to get by, right? And all of a sudden they forget about going to school and getting a degree, and maybe they don't think that it is something that is worth getting, because then you have to get into debt, and then why are you going to study if I can get paid $1,000 a week and get by, and that's enough, and they decide that education is not worth it. That was not the case for you. In fact, you have all the way from your associate's degree to your PhD in education and everything in between. What was your motivation for you to really continue studying all the way?
Okay, so I want to say that it's not me trying to sell my books, but it is chapter 2 where I talk about why do I love education so much. And one of the reasons why I love education was because I was immersed in education since I was little. My grandmother only finished, I think it was 4th grade when she was little in the DR. And she used to tell me all the time, like, I give up school. You're not going to give up school. Like, for her, it was like a non-negotiable family value that all of us had to do and had to get an education. Nothing else will make her happier than see her kids take a picture in their graduation, and then she hanging up the picture everywhere so she can tell everyone in the neighborhood and the village that her kids went to school. That was better than getting her a car, a house. Education was everything for her. Everything, all of my decisions as a child was around education. When my grandmother didn't have a babysitter for me, you know what she did? She enrolled me in schools twice. So in the DR, you either go to school in the morning, like 7 to 1 or like 7 to 12, something like that.
Yeah.
And then you go to school 2 to 6. She enrolled me in school twice. She got another birth certificate, put me in 2 schools. So I was taking the same class twice each day. I was in school from like 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day.
Yeah.
Because that was her solution for everything. Oh, she needed to go out. She would put me in una escuelita de tareas. That's a little like mentoring table that they had for kids.
Yeah.
So I will always be in school. My dad used to tutor math. I used to tutor kids. I remember even when I came here, and I would call the DR, and I was like, this is very hard here. Maybe I should get 2 or 3 jobs. Maybe I shouldn't go to school. Blah, blah, blah. Like, this is very hard. And one of the advice I got from my family, and I don't know if it was my grandmother, somebody from my family, because they're very into school. They were like, si le coges amor al dinero, no vas a hacer la escuela. If you start like savoring money, you're going to give up on school. So they actually didn't want me to earn a lot of money. Because if I earn a lot of money and like you said, and I will get an apartment and get a car and get all of this, why will I go back to school?
Yeah.
So that was one thing that they used to tell me. And then another thing was because if I wanted to go to school full time, I couldn't earn that much money. The schedule was during the day.
Yeah.
So it
Right.
was like a decision I had to make. And
Yep.
then the other thing that they used to tell me all the time, I remember my father saying this at one point, even though I didn't grow up with him that much. He used to say to me, like, people that study work with their head, and people that don't study work with their physical body. So if you
Yeah.
choose not to go to school, even though, it might be something that is not sensitive, like, I'm sorry, I'm just telling my story, what I heard.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
No,
so, but she
absolutely.
was like, if you're not planning to go to school, you better have a good body and good health because you're going to have to use your body a lot.
Yeah.
So, and then he used to just everything was around school. He used to tell me, well, if you like dancing and you like to go out, if you like to have your beer, blah, 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 it's very different to go out
Yeah.
and party while you're having your degree and you're having your nice job. Then go out
Yeah.
and party, and then the next day you don't have any money to pay for your meal. So,
Yeah.
everything, partying, making friends, having a house, everything was around education. You want to earn a house, you better have your degree. You want to have a car, you better have your degree. You want to have fun and party, you better have your degree. You want to meet good
Yeah.
people, you better have your degree. Everything was around school.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, I mean, I talked to my friends as well because, like I told you, I was very privileged. So I really didn't start working a real job until I finished my PhD. And so all of that time, I had maybe a tutoring job at school, or in my PhD, we got paid to do our research because in the sciences, we get that privilege that you don't earn a lot of money. You earn just enough to get by, to just live a decent life. But I would say like we've got paid $19,000 a year
The stipend that they
to
give you.
yeah, a stipend, but that's what you live with, and then you go to school every day and do the work that you do. And we did have to do sacrifices, and those were sacrifices that we did up front so that after finishing our school and getting our degrees and starting our jobs, we could live a life that was slightly less demanding, a life that was just going to work, enjoying your life, right? So I think that's just something to think about for those people that may think that education is not worthy and getting into debt is not worth it.
So this is a very touchy subject for me.
Tell
Because
me more.
it's very touchy because I did go to school and I don't regret many of the things that I learned because it's very good to learn things, right? But I think that universities are not doing enough to support our community and to support our development. So I think universities have to take the role of, if you're going to invest that much money in getting to so much debt to get an education, they should do a more active role is making sure that you have a job after school. So for example, you may have people that do a PhD, but they have not taken a class on social skills or
Yep.
life skills or relationships or leadership. So then you have people that have a PhD, but then they cannot thrive in other environments. Like they can thrive in academia, but
Yeah.
then how do you transfer that knowledge into tech ed or technical
Yeah.
education or going into Silicon Valley or all of that? So I do
Yep.
feel that we're falling short on that, and also our underrepresented minority. So at the university where I used to work, I used to have a lot of minority students, Dominicans, Venezuelans, and all that they used to feel like they didn't have enough support dedicated for them in order for them to get a job. So they used to come to me, their professor, not the career advisors that they had at the university. So they come to
Because
me
they're not
because
relatable.
they're not relatable, but also they felt like they weren't as responsive towards them. They didn't give them as much guidance. They couldn't, like you said, they're relatable. They couldn't relate to a first generation student and the struggle they had to deal with. So they just expected like, oh, you should know what the
Exactly.
next steps are. And I'm like, if you're the first person in your family getting a degree, you don't have
Yeah.
anybody else telling you how to
Yeah.
navigate those environments.
Yep.
So that's why representation matters, because then I had to teach my class and I was mentoring my own student. And then I had all of those students that were not my students,
Yeah.
that other students will tell them, oh, she's Dominican. She's,
Mm-hmm.
first one in her family to get a degree, a graduate degree. She knows about the struggle. So they used to come to me sometimes with their resume in Spanish. And then I will talk to
Mm-hmm.
them and tell them, this is how you translate it correctly. This is what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
This is what you do. Send an email to the recruiter. Like all of these things that are
Yeah.
the social capital that sometimes you don't have
Yeah.
when you're first
Yep.
gen.
Yeah.
And
I call it the generational knowledge.
the generational knowledge that wasn't passed down to you.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why DNI is important, because
Mm-hmm.
organizations keep putting people in positions of power that can only relate to one audience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they used to help, they help people that look like them, that talk like
Mm-hmm.
them, that have the same social circle as them. Not to say
Mm-hmm.
that there are people that look different than me that haven't helped me. Like I've had people that have extended their hand to me and look very
Yeah.
different than me. But then
Yeah.
if your population of students, like you have a population of students that look like me and that have the same background as me, you should have somebody who can relate to them, because they're spending and they're paying as much money as all the other students, and
Yeah.
sometimes more money because they're international
Mm-hmm.
students. But they're
Mm-hmm.
getting half of the support that is available
Yeah.
to other students that are in the
Yeah.
university.
I agree with you 100% because like I was very lucky when I told you when I got to UF, I had a group of people from the colleges I went to that got me the scholarship to go to UF. It was a group of international students. We came from all over the world. It wasn't just from Latinos or people from the Caribbean. It was a group of people from all over the world. But they knew how important it was to set up a support system for these students to help them succeed, right? So I benefited from that support system. They helped us from getting a bank account so that we could get paid, from finding a job at the university so that we could be compliant with our visa and still earn money. They had jobs lined up for us already because
Mhm.
they knew how important all of these things were. They had organized buddy systems so that other students that were in the same group as ours would be our mentors, and they could help us get as simple as from one building in the campus to another one in 15 minutes, because that's all the time that you had to switch from one class to another one, right?
Mhm.
And so I absolutely I agree with you, because that's also the reason why we started this podcast, right? Because my husband and I, once we got to grad school, we found our Latino community in applying for scholarships. My husband is a Ford Fellow, so he became a Ford Fellow and made community with all these underrepresented minorities in this group. And we knew that there were resources and there was information that we were lacking that we got from this community. And so our thought was like, I mean, there's so much knowledge out here that we know and that most of our peers and most of the people that are coming after us don't have access to, so that let's create a platform where we can share that and make ourselves available, so that if somebody listens to it and has a question, please email us. We'll do our best to try and help you. You don't have to do this alone. And I know and I understand that support is not available at universities, at colleges, and even less at community colleges, which is all we can afford sometimes.
Mm-hmm. And that also translates into the professional environment, right? Because you have
Mm-hmm.
people that are first generation and they don't know like the importance of the 401k or how to maximize their 401k. Like I had learned about
Mm-hmm.
all of that after I bought several books, because I love to read,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I'm looking at all this movement about the fire movement,
Yeah.
financial retire, like retire early,
Yeah.
all of that movement. And then I started reading books, and I was like, how come no one sat with me and said, this
Mm-hmm.
is the impact that it has in several years, and in this, like this is how
Yeah.
much, and this is how you maximize, and this is what it means, and this is what a growth rate is.
Yeah.
Because I think we still live in a system where we're still catering to people that are, privileged in terms of social knowledge, cultural knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
that have generational
Mm-hmm.
foundations that have been passed down
Yeah.
to them, when
Yeah.
in fact the United States is filled with people like us.
Yeah.
And how come the work environment in universities haven't adapted to serve us too?
Mm-hmm.
It's unbelievable that we're still living in this environment in 2023.
I 100% agree. Looking then at your list of accomplishments, right? I went on LinkedIn and I looked at all of your education and the places you've worked. And like I mentioned, you have your associate's degree, a bachelor's, then you got your master's degree, then you got your doctorate in education, in higher education leadership from the University of Miami. And then in between, you have a number of lists of certifications. You have your own business now, you're an executive coach. So many things that are listed, all of these accomplishments, right? And it makes me think about this saying that Black and brown people have to work twice as hard to get half as far as white people in this country. Tell me more about your list of accomplishments and whether that is a saying that you identify with.
So I think we have to change a little bit of the narrative of we have to work twice as hard, and we have to talk about we get half of the support that other people might get. And I'm not saying that that happens to everyone, but I could see that manifesting in so many different, when I interviewed so many women for my book, right? And they told me how they had to go and get a degree to get the same job that somebody without a degree got. So where is the support when that person went to get that job? Why didn't somebody say, well, we've hired people without a degree for that job. We're going to hire you without a degree for that job. But instead, we are expected to do more, to prove ourselves more. It's like, oh, you look this certain way sometimes. And it's like, because we look a certain way, we have to do all of these big things to prove that we are as smart, that we are as competent, and that we are as high performers as everybody else. So I feel like there is a lack of acknowledging first that we are very competent, and that sometimes comes because of biases and stereotypes, that because you have an accent or because you're a minority woman, then all of a sudden I'm just going to expect that you're not going to be performing as high as other people, when we know that's not true. Women work a lot. We have two shifts. We have the shift at work, and we have the shift at home when we have kids. I mean, I've met incredible women, Black women, Afrolatinas, that they work a lot. But it's like, it just goes unnoticed. A lot of the times it goes unnoticed. So we have to work as hard, twice as hard, many times, because we get half of the support and we get more expectations from our managers to make sure that they see us as the same level as everybody else. So yes, I have seen it. I've been in situations when I'm the one with a doctoral degree, but they want to put somebody without a doctoral degree to be overseeing me. I am the one with experience. I've been in situations where my doctorate degree is in education, and then somebody else who wasn't preparing that field is telling me how to prepare my classroom. And I mean, I can teach them, and I will be offering my services of let me mentor you and teach you how to do course design, how to do this and that. But it's just this expectation that how could I know more than them? And that is something that hurts our community a lot. It hurts women a lot. When we are in situations where we are in meetings and we tell our ideas, or we tell people how they should do things, and nobody listens to us. And then a man will say it, the same thing we said. And then all of a sudden, he's very smart because he comes from a man.
Oh, what a great idea.
What a great idea. And these are the things that we deal with on a regular basis. And I saw it, in program support. I led a program at one point, and I had to go through so many people to get the program advertised, or the program to appear in a newsletter. And then for other people, they didn't have to ask. Their manager will go to them and say, oh, we have a newsletter. Do you want us to showcase the program? That will give you a lot of people. So they make their job much easier. Yeah. And then we have the job much harder. And then they question, why is it that, we speak about inequalities and DE&I? Because, we experience it day in and day out. We can see it in the way that we're treated, in the way that we're talked to, the way that our ideas are received when it comes to women in the workplace. Not to say that, some women are able to deliver their ideas. I'm not, generalizing, but when it comes to the people that I've interviewed, when it comes to research, the numbers don't lie. And women are treated different than men. and the way that they're perceived in the workplace is sometimes as less competent, even though we're not. We have scored significantly higher than men in a
Yeah.
lot of leadership skills, empathy, compassion, but still is kind of, I don't know what else. I don't know what else we can do. We've written books, we've done podcasts, we've
Yeah.
gone out.
Yeah, I mean, I have this hypothesis now is that I went through my life up until I got to corporate America being completely oblivious because I was an immigrant, an international student, and I was like, I just, I'll do whatever I have to
Mhm.
do, always being myself because I didn't know how to do anything else by being something else. One, and I also didn't know that I couldn't show myself like as I was because I was not going to be well received. So I never felt the need to code switch because I didn't know that there was something that was needed for people like you and me to be well received in the spaces where we were moving. So I went through my first 30 years of life, living my life as myself, just figuring out and problem solving, right? And then when I started realizing that people were judging me for who I was and with people for my personality, for the way that I looked or for whatever, not professionally, because they had nothing to complain about in terms of the work that I did, because again, we excel at what we do. I started realizing that and I was like, you know what? If you feel comfortable with me in the room, perfect. And if you don't feel comfortable with me in the room, that is your problem because I can't change you. Like you are going to have to make the decision to change yourself. So I can't make the decision every day. Or how am I going to change somebody today? I can't.
So it speaks volume that somebody will be so triggered by your presence. Like,
Yeah.
why are you so triggered like why aren't I mean, triggered by you? Like I could be
Yeah.
triggered by you, but it's like not expected that you're gonna make me feel uncomfortable. But then you feel uncomfortable. Like that speaks volume about how much work we need to do when it relates to D&I. And that's why leadership, like I said before, is a responsibility because if you're a leader, you cannot let that happen. Like, you cannot
Yeah.
have people that are minority feeling like they have to change who they are in order for them to just do their work. That gives you so much, like you're putting so much emotional labor on the minority employee. And then it turns into a situation where they're more managing like how they're received and how people see them and how people feel with them. They have to invest so much energy into that they could be investing in doing their job. But we also do
Yeah.
our job. So we're
Yeah.
like split. It's two things that we have to do. We have to manage expectations and we have to do our job and we have to excel. Like there is a lot of
Yeah.
burden that we're putting on people that are minorities in the
Yeah.
workplace. When if
Yeah.
somebody else can just come, clock in and clock out, do their job and leave, why can't we just do the same?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I agree. And one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, Marisol, is because we have talked, especially from me being a woman in science, like we have talked in the podcast about the differences between women and men and how women and men are treated. But I've never really dove into the topic of Afrolatinidad and the experiences of Black women in the workplace. And you identified as an Afro-Latina, and this is the work that you do now. I wanted to see if you can help us first make the distinction between Latinidad and Afro-Latinidad, because I think we have to start there. Our community is still, I think, fairly ignorant about these topics, and I wanted to see if you can help us shed some light into those differences.
Yes. And for my Afro Latinas listening in, I am an Afro Latina. I don't identify
Yes.
as one. I am. So,
You are an
no, I know,
Afro-Latina.
I know. You're trying to be inclusive and things like that. But so I love that you're bringing up this question because still to this day, when you go and apply for jobs and they want to know your race, so this like voluntary
Yeah.
self-identification form, they have
Yeah.
Black, white, indigenous, and then they have Latino, Hispanic, and Latino. I'm like, that's not a race. It is not a race. It's an ethnicity. Within the Latino community, there is Black, there is white, there is indigenous, there is all of those races are in the Latino community. So when you go and apply for jobs and they have it there as a race, I'm like, what are you thinking? And then they have Hispanic or Latino, you have to select. Black, but not Hispanic or Latino, or two or more races, but Hispanic or Latino. Like they have all these things, like you cannot be Black and be Latino at the same time. So to talk about this more, I would say like I'm from the Dominican Republic, and in the DR, a lot of people look like me. There is a lot of people, I would say, 70 to 80% of people look like me. But then growing up, if I watch TV, people that like look like me weren't on television, weren't in high positions of power, doctors and lawyers. So I didn't know that much about what I know now about D&I, but now I know that it's because of the colorism that happens in our own community. So growing up Dominican, you hear things such as, well, if you have curly hair, we need to tame your hair because it's not presentable. And then you're surrounded by people that have curly hair like you, but they don't know how to take care of their own natural hair. So we have to relax our hair very young. Yeah. And that has to do a lot with us trying to assimilate to the white population, the white Dominicans. And people need to understand that this colorism and preference, white supremacy, preference for people that look white or have features of white people, it goes all the way back to slavery and colonization. So when the Spaniards came and colonized the DR, in the DR, there was a class system where you were offered more opportunities to be in governments and in hospitals if you were white Spaniards. If you were a white Spaniard and you mixed with a Taino, you had a different name. I believe, I wrote about this, so I should know this. But if it's a white, I think if Spaniard and Taino, then it was mulatto. And if it was a mulatto with a person from Africa, a Black person from Africa, they had another name. And they also had a class system throughout the Americas. So you either was peninsulares because you were from Spain and didn't get mixed with anybody, or you were criollo. And that's where la comida criolla comes from, because it's the mix between Latino and Spaniard. So it's important to notice that because the darker you were, the less access you had to power. And then what happens 100 years later? What happens, right now in 2023? You look at positions of power in society in the Dominican Republic, you barely see people that look like me. And why is that? Because we didn't have access to a lot of that power back then. So our family right now, a lot of our families is getting out of poverty. Because now our generation, millennials and Gen Zs, we are speaking up about it. We're telling people that's not right. This is not the way it should be. We need more representation. The whole movement of Black Lives Matter. All of the people are becoming more and more aware of the inequalities that we have in our own Latino community. You watch movies about Latinos. In the Heights. It was based in Washington Heights. A Dominican community population. Yeah. They didn't have a Dominican actor or actress in the lead role. They didn't have an Afro-Latina in the lead role. We are like the majority of the Dominican population. So when you look at movies, and there was another movie, The Father of the Bride, not one Afro-Latinos there was a scenery where there was the wedding and people were happy. It was a beautiful movie. I love the movie. Where is the Afro-Latinos? Where are they? It's like we don't even exist. So in our own community, we face racism and we face texturism, which is the preference for hair that is straight versus curly. And we need to embrace why isn't my hair accepted? Why isn't my nose
Yeah.
accepted? My big nose and
Yeah.
my features. Like it is so
Mm-hmm.
embedded in our beauty standards, it's embedded in our movies, in the people that we cast for movie, in the people that we select for jobs, in the way that sometimes I hear people saying, well, you should be glad. I interviewed a woman for my book that she said to me, people were so happy when this white Latina woman, I think she was an Argentinian or something, came to work for my company because people thought, oh, she's a Latina just like you. So you're probably going to have the best time. And she
Yeah.
said to herself,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, people don't understand that within our own community, people treat us
Mm.
very different. I've been in
Yeah.
conversations in the past where when I speak Spanish, people are surprised that I speak Spanish because they first sees me as Black and then as Latina.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
something that we
Yeah.
don't speak about a lot. It's like
Mm-hmm.
we're
Yeah.
first treated by the
That's why
way
you
we
present.
look
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
by our ethnicity.
Yeah.
So yes, Afro Latinos, we do exist. We do have people
Yeah.
that came from Africa that were enslaved in the Dominican Republic. We are here. We're descendants
Yeah.
of slaves and Taino.
Yeah.
We still
Mm-hmm.
exist. And even though society and television and jobs are still not representative of us, we have to make sure that people know that we exist, that we're here, and that we're ready
Yeah.
to assume as many positions of power as other white Latinos have taken. Indigenous people too. We
Yeah.
have indigenous people in our own community who are
Mm-hmm.
ready to,
Yeah.
and we need to be more diverse within our own community.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it goes to, first of all, I don't know if it's accepting or what we need to do, but I have heard so many Latinos, myself included. I grew up in Venezuela, and I thought when I first left Venezuela, I went to post apartheid South Africa, essentially, right? It was 20 years after apartheid, but you could still see the very differences in racism, right? And I felt like I grew up in a country where racism didn't exist. And my logic was, well, we're so mixed, right? We have white in my own family. My mom is white as white as they come, because somewhere down the line, our grandparents were Spaniard or whatever, and my dad comes from Black roots, Black and indigenous roots, and so my mom's white. My dad had a huge afro when he was in his 30s and 40s, right? And then my sister and I, when we were born, my sister is closer to my mom. She looks more like my mom, and then I look more like my dad and my dad's side of the family. So I'm brown, and then as I get more exposed to sunlight, I get darker, but my hair is straight like the indigenous people, and then I have features of my mom that probably are like more towards white, right? So I thought, well, we're so mixed. There's no way we can be racist, right? And then I remember very clearly growing up, and like you come with a boyfriend to your house, and then it's like, mira, está con un blanquito, hay que mejorar la raza.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're going to the United States. Oh, encuéntrate un gringo porque hay que mejorar la raza.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm like, where? Like, I just say that. I don't know how many times I said that when I was like in
Like,
my,
what does
before
mejorar la
turning
raza
20.
mean?
What does mejorar la raza means?
Mm-hmm. That's the
Exactly.
question. Like, I have so I'm married to a white person right now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know how we got there, but it wasn't like I didn't set out to look for a white person to marry, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
we've been married and all of that, but I can just sense the difference in treatment I get sometimes when I'm in the Dominican Republic with him. So I've been in instances when we go out and people tell me like, aren't you glad your kids look like the father?
Like your
And I'm like,
husband.
what are you trying to say? So I will tell you that some of these happen, and we don't are very aware about the racism in our own community because we don't talk about it as much. We have accepted it. Like, I think that sometimes Black people in our own community are, idolizing the white race. And please don't cancel me. But it does happen because that the message of mejorar la raza, that is what you're doing. You're basically saying that you'd rather have, like, it's better for me to have kids that look white than that look like me.
Yep.
And it's like, what does that, like that, you're sending a huge message to kids that are growing up listening to that. So for example, when I was 8 and I met my mom, my mom came to my house at one time, like this was I think my second interaction with her. She was set on killing my curls because she said, oh, no, it's not presentable. You're going to be on pictures and blah, blah, blah. And, that was my first reaction. And that is a very common story within the Dominican community. So nobody was there saying, well, curls are beautiful. Because you're...
En Venezuela los llaman pelo malo.
Well, in the Dominican Republic, having curls is bad hair. That's the name for curls. And then having straight hair is good hair. So that's in the whole chapter I have about Afrolatinidad. I speak about that. Because if you're telling me since I'm little, you have bad hair, you should marry somebody who's white so you can better the race, then what does that tell you about your self-worth as a person?
Yeah.
The only way that I can bring worth to my family, my community, is by me mixing with a white person and erasing my race. So you go through that in our own community, and we're not aware that it's racism because everybody's it's very common, right? But now I'm very aware, and when I go to restaurants that are Latins and I see Afro-Latinos in the kitchen cleaning, and then I see the white Latinos as hostess, like the person who looks presentable in the front of the restaurant greeting people, then I'm like, why don't you have an Afro-Latino in the front? Like, what's going on here?
In the front,
like all of these things, you think about when you go to banks and you just have an Afro-Latino as a teller,
as the greeter.
Like, why don't you? Like, these are things that now I'm very aware, and I speak up whenever. Like, if I have to speak up, I will speak up about it.
This I'm going to tie up to leadership, right? Because then what happens is, what I've observed in the workplace and with my friends is that, especially for Venezuelans, is that when we come here right now, and I don't know if the majority, but like say the only place I have access to right now is the petroleum industry. And a lot of the Latinos who are in the petroleum industry studied in their countries, say a bachelor's degree, and then they came here either as expats from having worked at companies, or as international students that got masters and PhDs here in the US and then started working, right? And so I see it with white presenting Latinos all the time that, first of all, because we are international students, we have to have a visa, right? So we don't have the privilege of not doing what they tell us to do at the company, because if I get fired, I have to leave. I only have 2 weeks in the country until I find another job before I have to go back to my country, right? So we live in fear of, I have to work at this company. I'm so glad that they gave me a visa so that I can work. And all I care about is doing whatever I need to do to keep my job, right? So that means I work twice as hard or harder than anybody else. And then if there's something bothering me, I never can complain, because if I complain, maybe, I don't know, I may lose my job forever for whatever reason.
That is something that happens to a lot of women.
Yeah. And so then what happens is that for international students, sometimes it takes 6-7 years before a company helps you get a green card, right? And so in those 7 years, you are trying to advance in your career, and then you are being conditioned to assimilate into the dominant culture, right? And then if you're a white presenting Latino, you believe that that is the culture that you have to, because if you look more like them, you're eventually going to blend in and you're going to have the same opportunities that everybody else.
And if you look up to that, because you look at I've met I met some white Latinos that they look up to people that are white, but then they look at Latinidad like something that is less than. And I've seen it so many times. Before 2020 and before the movement of Black Lives Matter, I remember one person in particular that I asked her when I met her, where are you from? And she's like, I'm from Spain. My family are from Cuba, but I'm from Spain. I'm like, she's never been to Spain. She doesn't have any family in Spain. But, she just says to people that she's from Spain, right?
Yeah.
After the BLM movement came out, the amount of times I heard the same woman say that she was a woman of color, I couldn't believe it. Then she was like, I'm from Cuba. and I'm a woman of color and I've been oppressed. Like all of these things just came out of nowhere. And I'm like, so you were fine for all this year calling yourself that you are a Spaniard,
Mm-hmm.
looking down at your Latino people, looking down at Dominicans
Mm-hmm.
and Cubans and Puerto Ricans and telling everybody how she was. I couldn't even relate to us. She couldn't relate to
Yeah.
us because she was from Spain. And in the middle of the
Yeah.
BLM movement, and there was some opportunities to create some equity for
Mm.
leaders to create equity in the workplace, to give people that never had the opportunity to move up the ladder, people that have accent, people
Mm-hmm.
that are Black, people that are indigenous, people that are first generation, people that are international, like all of these people that really need somebody to push them to the next level
Yeah.
because we don't have anybody else to hand, like we don't have
Mm-hmm.
people giving us things, or we sometimes lack the social capital. So you need people, like you said, you have to wait 7 years to get a sponsorship. Like
Mm-hmm.
you actually need a leader to step up and
Yeah.
say, you know what, I'm not
Yep.
going to put you through all of this nonsense. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
sponsor you now so that you can stay here. That is
Yeah.
the responsibility of a leader. Then you have these
Yeah.
people that say that they were from Spain getting in front of the line and then say, well, by the way, I'm a Latino
Yeah.
who has been white presenting all this time.
Mm-hmm.
And that is
Mm-hmm.
something that we
Yeah.
don't speak about. So when we're talking about the responsibility of leadership, it's understanding that everybody's experience is different. My experience as an
Mm-hmm.
Afro-Latina is very different maybe than somebody who's an international student and had those struggles with like immigration and staying and all of those things.
Yeah.
And then it may be different, or my an experience of a woman with no children may be very different than a mother
Mm-hmm.
with children in the
Yeah.
workplace.
Right.
So you need
Right.
to understand those struggles to see where, as a leader, you can step in and make life easier for them. That their
Mm.
identities are not an additional burden that they have to carry in addition to doing their jobs. That's where the
Yeah.
the,
Yeah.
the leadership responsibility comes in.
Yeah. And Marisol, what would you tell to those Latinx leaders that are coming through the ropes, that starting to get into management positions? Let's give them the benefit of the
Of
doubt
course.
and say that they're unaware of the type of leader they are becoming because of the environment they have been in. Eventually, they're going to become like what they see in those leadership positions, right? What would be your advice for these Latinx leaders to start thinking a little beyond of what they're seeing, what they've been forced to do, and start recognizing the type of leader they're becoming and the type of leader they can be?
Very simply put, stop making assumption about people. Stop making the assumption that the mothers that you're leading don't have the time to do their job. Stop making assumption that because they're mothers, they're not competent. Stop making assumption that because somebody is Black and is calling out or asking for equity, that they're angry. Stop making assumptions that because you're hiring a minority, regardless of their background, that they're going to be one way or the other. And I think that's where biases come from, is this assumption we have about people. We meet a Black person and we assume things about them. We meet a Latino person, we assume things about them. We meet a person with an accent, we assume their competence based on their accent. So stop making assumptions about people, because when people that are not in a minority population show up to work, there are barely any assumptions about them. They tell you who they are and you believe them. They tell you, I'm competent, I'm this, I'm that, I can do the job, you believe them. So why is it so hard sometimes to believe somebody that is from a different background than you? Because we make a lot of assumption about who they are, what they're capable of, whether they're ready, whether they're loyal, whether they're angry, whether they're not angry, whether they're a threat. Like there's so many assumptions, so many biases. So I will say, stop making assumptions, check your biases and your stereotypes. And as a leader, your job is to make the lives of your employees better, not worse. So if your employees, when they come to work, they have to deal with emotional labor, they have to deal with a lot of backstabbing, they have to deal with just different treatment, that is going to impact their livelihood. That's going to impact their emotions, and their emotions are going to take it with them at home. That is going to impact their home. That is going to impact their community. So as a leader, you have a huge responsibility to make sure that the people that are working for you feel psychologically safe to be themselves at all times.
Yeah, yeah. And Marisol, so you wrote your own book about leadership. It's ready now. It's in the market, right? Tell us the take-home message from the book and where we can go and get the book.
So the name of the book is Leadership is a Responsibility: How to Become an Inclusive Leader in the Modern Workplace by Understanding the Lived Experiences of Black Women and Afro-Latinas at Work. The big message of the book is that we go through very different experiences at work based on our identities. Just saying that it doesn't exist doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It does exist. So there is a lot of stories of women that I interviewed. My own story in the workplace is there. And to really check how policies, leadership approach, the way that you promote people, performance appraisals, how some of these things may have some exclusionary aspects to them. The way that you even promote people, the considerations, like you have to, everything you do as a leader has an impact on the lives of your employees. And you have to make sure that the things that you're doing as a leader are inclusive. And that's basically the big message of my book.
And where can we get your book?
It's available on Amazon, Books and Books, Walmart, Barnes and Noble, everywhere. If you want a signed copy, I will say DM me on LinkedIn. And then you can purchase your copy directly through me, and I can send you a signed copy. If not, you can go order it on Amazon and get it in 2 days.
All right. So we'll put the link to your LinkedIn on the show notes so that people can directly message you if they want a book, signed copy by the author. And I promise we'll have a second conversation because there were so many things that we didn't talk about in this original episode. But like I said, I'll read the book, I'll make my notes, and then we'll come back and talk about it. But before we close, imagine that a friend of yours is coming to visit you in your town and they want you to show them around as a local, but you are giving a speech in New York and you're not able to show them around. What would be your recommendations of the top things to do or places to visit and a place where you want to highlight? I don't know, it can be the DR if you want to.
I will highlight Dominican Republic, Santiago. So I said people that go to the DR, they usually want to go to Punta Cana. I'm like, don't go to Punta Cana, go to Samaná. Samaná, you can do whale watching. You can have amazing food. Actually, I'm planning my retreat to go to the DR with a group of leaders to go and learn about leadership and emotional intelligence and wellness. So that's in the books. But I will say, go to Samaná. Go to Jarabacoa, which is a mountains in the DR. It's amazing. And then I will also say go to rivers, just regular rivers in the DR in Santiago, in the mountains. It's amazing to be surrounded by nature.
This is nice. I like it. All right, Marisol, thank you so much for joining us in the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Thank you for listening. If you want to put a face to the voices you just heard, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at LatinXcan. If you have questions or feedback, you can email us at latinxcan@gmail.com. And if you want to support our project, please leave a review. We have made it easy for you and added the links to the show notes. That's it for now. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and remember, unidos somos más.